There is a version of you that you have never met. Not because that person does not exist, but because you keep making the same choices that keep that person hidden. Think about that. There is a stronger version of you somewhere behind your excuses, a calmer version behind your anxiety, a disciplined version behind your procrastination, a confident version behind your fear, a focused version behind all the distractions you have allowed to occupy your mind. And perhaps the most painful truth is this. You already know what you need to do. You know the conversation you need to have. You know the habit you need to break. You know the work you need to begin. You know the skill you need to develop. You know the money you need to stop wasting. You know the hours you are losing. You know the person you could become. And yet you keep postponing the moment when you finally become serious about your own life. Let me ask you something. How long are you going to negotiate with the weaker version of yourself? How many mornings will you wake up knowing you should change and then return to the same behavior? How many opportunities will pass while you are waiting to feel ready? How many years can disappear while you keep telling yourself that one day things will be different? Because one day is not a date on the calendar. One day is a hiding place. It is where people put the dreams they are afraid to pursue. And maybe you have been living there. Maybe you have been saying, one day I will become disciplined. One day I will get serious. One day I will start that business. One day I will fix my finances. One day I will become confident. One day I will stop wasting time. But here's what nobody tells you. One day becomes 1 month. 1 month becomes 1 year. 1 year becomes 5 years. And eventually you wake up with something far more painful than failure. You wake up with evidence of what you could have become. I want you to imagine yourself 5 years from now. Don't rush past this. Close your eyes if you need to. Imagine that 5 years have passed. Your life has continued. The world has changed. Technology has changed. People around you have changed. Some people you know have moved forward. Some have become stronger. Some have built businesses. Some have learned skills. Some have become healthier. Some have repaired relationships. Some have become financially stable. And you? You are standing in exactly the same emotional place. Same excuses. Same distractions. Same fears. Same habits. Same promises, same tomorrow. How would that feel? Not for 5 seconds. Really feel it. Because sometimes the pain of an imagined future is powerful enough to awaken you from a comfortable present. Now, imagine something else. 5 years have passed. But this time, you decided that your mind would no longer control you. You stopped obeying every impulse. You stopped allowing every notification to interrupt your attention. You stopped treating temporary discomfort like an emergency. You began keeping promises to yourself. You worked when you did not feel like working. You studied when entertainment was easier. You saved when spending was tempting. You exercised when comfort was calling. You stayed silent when anger wanted a reaction. You continued when nobody applauded. You learned to sit alone without feeling abandoned. You learned to fail without calling yourself a failure. You learn to begin again without shame. And slowly, almost invisibly, your life changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, quickly, one decision at a time, one morning at a time, one refusal at a time, one disciplined action at a time. And one day you looked in the mirror and realized something. You were no longer trying to become that person. You had become that person. That is what we are talking about. Not perfection, not superiority, not being better than everyone else. Being better than the version of yourself that keeps betraying your potential. Because the 1% is not always about being extraordinary. Sometimes the 1% simply means being willing to do what the other 99% repeatedly refuse to do. Wake up when you said you would. Keep your word. Finish what you start. Control your attention. Control your emotions. learn instead of complain, build instead of consume, delay pleasure instead of sacrificing your future for it. Take responsibility instead of searching for someone to blame. That sounds simple. But simple does not mean easy. And there is something deeper underneath all of this. You may think your biggest problem is discipline. It may not be. You may think your biggest problem is time. It may not be. You may think your biggest problem is motivation. It may not be. The deeper problem may be that you have trained your mind to expect comfort. And once the mind becomes addicted to comfort, growth begins to feel like danger. That is where the battle begins. Because your mind will often choose what feels good now over what will make you proud later. You know this. You have experienced it. You planned to work. Then your phone appeared. You planned to study. Then you told yourself you were tired. You planned to exercise. Then you promised yourself tomorrow would be better. You planned to save money. Then you rewarded yourself with something you did not need. You planned to speak with confidence. Then fear whispered, "What if they judge you?" And you listened. The problem was not that you did not know what to do. The problem was that you allowed a temporary feeling to make a permanent decision. Let that sink in. A temporary feeling made a permanent decision. That is how lives change direction. Not always through huge disasters, sometimes through tiny moments. The moment you choose another hour of distraction. The moment you say, "I'll do it tomorrow." The moment you decide that discomfort means you should stop. The moment you let someone else's opinion become more important than your own values. The moment you allow anger to control your words. The moment you let fear decide which opportunity you will accept. Small moments, repeated, compounded, and eventually they become a life. There was a young man who had spent years believing he had a motivation problem. Every Sunday night, he would make promises to himself. This week will be different. He would write goals. He would watch motivational videos. He would buy notebooks. He would create schedules. Monday morning would begin with energy. By Wednesday, the energy was gone. By Friday, the plan was abandoned. Sunday night, guilt returned, and the cycle repeated for years. Then one evening, he sat alone after another week of unfinished promises. He looked at his notebook. Page after page was filled with goals. And suddenly he realized something that hurt. He wasn't failing because he lacked information. He was failing because he had become very good at negotiating with himself. Every time discomfort appeared, he negotiated. Just 10 more minutes. I deserve a break. I'll start when things calm down. I need to feel motivated. I'll do it when I'm ready. And eventually he understood. His mind had learned that his promises were optional. That was the real problem. So he stopped making dramatic promises. He made smaller ones, and then he kept them. He said he would wake at a certain time. He did. He said he would work for 30 minutes. He did. He said he would walk every day. He did. He said he would stop checking his phone during work. He did. Nothing looked impressive from the outside. But something extraordinary was happening inside. He was rebuilding trust with himself. And that is one of the most overlooked forms of personal power, self-trust. Confidence is not simply believing you are capable. Confidence is having evidence. Evidence that when you say you will do something, you do it. Evidence that when life becomes difficult, you do not immediately collapse. Evidence that when fear appears, you can continue. Evidence that when you fail, you can recover. Evidence that your emotions may speak loudly, but they do not get the final vote. This is how confidence is built, not by repeating, "I am confident," by giving yourself reasons to believe you can depend on yourself. Think about that the next time you make a promise to yourself, because every promise you keep makes your identity stronger, and every promise you repeatedly break teaches your mind something too. It teaches your mind, my word does not matter. That is dangerous. Because eventually, you stop believing yourself. You say you will change, but you don't believe it. You set a goal, but somewhere inside, you already expect to quit. You begin something, but a part of you is already preparing the excuse. And then you wonder why confidence feels so far away. Confidence did not disappear. You trained yourself not to trust yourself, but if something was trained, something can be retrained. And that is where hope begins. Not with a fantasy. With a decision, you can retrain attention, you can retrain discipline, you can retrain your responses. You can retrain your relationship with discomfort, you can retrain the story you tell yourself, but first, you have to stop lying to yourself about what is happening. Because you cannot change a pattern you refuse to acknowledge. Maybe you are not too busy. Maybe you are distracted. Maybe you are not waiting for the right time. Maybe you are afraid. Maybe you are not resting. Maybe you are avoiding. Maybe you are not thinking about it. Maybe you are procrastinating. And there is no shame in admitting it. There is power in admitting it. The person who says, "This is where I am," can begin moving. The person who says, "This isn't my fault," may remain stuck. Responsibility is not punishment. Responsibility is power. Because if everything is someone else's fault, then someone else controls your future. But when you say, "I may not control what happened, but I control what I do next," you take your life back. You may not control where you started. You may not control the family you were born into. You may not control every rejection. You may not control every loss. You may not control what someone said about you. You may not control the opportunities you missed, but you can control your response. And your response is where your future begins. There is a difference between what happens to you and what you repeatedly do because of what happened to you. That difference can become your freedom. I know someone who lost an opportunity that he had spent years preparing for. It was not a small disappointment. It was devastating. He had expected that opportunity to change his life. When it disappeared, he spent months talking about it. He told everyone why it happened. He explained who was responsible. He replayed the unfairness. And perhaps he was right. Perhaps it had been unfair. But one evening, someone asked him a question. How long are you willing to keep paying for something that already happened? He became quiet because he realized he was still paying every morning. Every conversation, every decision, the event had happened once. But he was reliving it hundreds of times. That is another way the mind can imprison you. The past cannot always hurt you directly. Sometimes it hurts you through the meaning you continue giving it. You cannot rewrite what happened, but you can change what it means. Failure can mean, "I am finished," or it can mean, "I have information now." Rejection can mean, "I am not enough," or it can mean, "This door was not mine." A mistake can mean, "I am stupid," or it can mean, "Now I know what not to repeat." A difficult season can mean, "My life is falling apart," or it can mean, "My character is being built." The event matters, but interpretation matters too. And the mind that learns to interpret difficulty differently becomes extraordinarily difficult to defeat. Now, let me take you somewhere deeper. What if your greatest enemy is not failure? What if it is identity? Because people rarely behave consistently against the identity they believe about themselves. If you believe you are lazy, you will find evidence of laziness. If you believe you are weak, you will interpret difficulty as proof. If you believe you are unlucky, you will notice every disappointment. If you believe you cannot change, every setback becomes confirmation. But identity works both ways. If you begin seeing yourself as disciplined, you start asking a different question. Not, "Do I feel like doing this?" But, "What does a disciplined person do now?" If you see yourself as someone who keeps promises, you stop debating. If you see yourself as a learner, mistakes become lessons. If you see yourself as resilient, difficulty becomes part of the process. This is why changing your life is not merely about changing your schedule. It is about changing the person who follows the schedule You can give a person the perfect plan. If the identity remains unchanged, the old behavior eventually returns. That is why people sometimes lose weight and gain it back. They start businesses and abandon them. They make money and lose it. They create routines and destroy them. They change their circumstances without changing their internal identity. And eventually the old self pulls them backward. So perhaps the question is not, what should I do? Perhaps the deeper question is, who am I becoming through what I repeatedly do? Every action is a vote. Every time you choose discipline, you vote for a disciplined identity. Every time you choose courage, you vote for courage. Every time you choose patience, you vote for patience. Every time you choose learning over entertainment, you vote for growth. And every time you choose the opposite, you vote for the opposite. You do not build identity in one giant moment. You build it quietly. Nobody sees most of the votes. Nobody applauds the morning you stayed focused. Nobody celebrates the purchase you didn't make. Nobody sees the argument you could have started but didn't. Nobody knows you closed the app and returned to your work. Nobody sees the night you wanted to quit but continued. But your mind sees, and your mind keeps records. That is why private discipline eventually creates public confidence. You become strong in public because you practiced strength in private. You become calm in pressure because you practiced emotional control when nobody was watching. You become focused when opportunity arrives because you trained your attention when nothing exciting was happening. This is the invisible work, and the invisible work eventually becomes visible. Now, think about distraction. People often treat distraction as harmless. I'll just check this. I'll just watch one video. I'll just scroll for a few minutes. But distraction is not simply about time. It is about attention. And attention is one of the most valuable assets you possess. Where your attention goes repeatedly, your life follows. If your attention is constantly pulled toward outrage, comparison, entertainment, gossip, fear, and meaningless stimulation, what kind of mind are you building? A restless one, a reactive one, a mind that needs constant stimulation. And then you sit down to do meaningful work, and suddenly everything feels boring. The work did not become boring. Your brain became accustomed to novelty. That is why learning to focus may initially feel uncomfortable. You are not merely removing distractions. You are rebuilding your ability to stay with something long enough for depth to emerge. Most people never experience depth because they leave too early. They leave the book, they leave the business, they leave the skill, they leave the relationship, they leave the exercise program. They leave the difficult conversation. They leave the dream. Not always because it was wrong, sometimes because the initial excitement disappeared. But the absence of excitement does not mean the presence of failure. Sometimes it means you have entered the part where character is built. Anybody can work when inspired. The question is, what happens when inspiration leaves? Anybody can begin. Who can continue? Anybody can speak about goals. Who can tolerate the boring repetition required to achieve them? That is where the difference appears. A musician practices scales nobody wants to hear. An athlete repeats movements nobody sees. A writer writes pages that may never be published. A business owner solves problems before anyone notices success. A student studies chapters that feel difficult. A strong person does ordinary things consistently. That is one of the secrets nobody wants because it is not glamorous. Mastery is usually boring before it becomes beautiful. You repeat, you refine, you fail, you correct, you repeat again. And one day something that used to feel difficult becomes natural. That is the compound effect. You do not notice one repetition. You notice what thousands of repetitions have created. The same is true in the opposite direction. One excuse seems harmless. One wasted hour seems harmless. One unhealthy meal seems harmless. One emotional reaction seems harmless. One day of procrastination seems harmless, but repeated enough times, these things stop being events. They become patterns. Patterns become habits. Habits become identity. Identity influences decisions. Decisions shape your life. So be careful with the small things. Your future is hiding inside them. I want you to imagine your life 1 year from now, not your dream life, your actual life if nothing changes. Same phone habits, same sleep habits, same spending habits, same emotional reactions, same people, same excuses, same amount of effort, same avoidance. Where does that lead? Now change only one thing. Not everything, one thing. You become serious about your attention. You protect your mornings. You spend 1 hour every day learning a valuable skill. You exercise consistently. You stop spending money impulsively. You begin keeping promises to yourself. What happens after a year? You may not become unrecognizable overnight, but you become different. And then those changes begin affecting other areas. Your confidence increases because your discipline increases. Your discipline increases because your self-trust increases. Your self-trust increases because you keep promises. Your focus improves because you protect your attention. Your skills improve because you practice. Your income may eventually improve because your skills become valuable. Your relationships may improve because your emotional control improves. One change touches another. That is why you should never underestimate a small disciplined action. It may be carrying more future inside it than you can currently see. But there is another side. You cannot build a powerful life while continuously feeding a weak mind. And feeding the mind means more than what you watch. It means what you repeatedly tell yourself. Listen to the internal conversation. What do you say when you make a mistake? I knew I would fail. I can't do anything right. I'm behind. Everyone is better than me. It's too late. I don't have what it takes. Imagine saying those things to a child every day. What would happen? That child would eventually believe them. So why do you think you can say them to yourself endlessly without consequences? You need honesty, not cruelty. There is a difference. You can say, I made a mistake, without saying, I am a mistake. You can say, I need to improve, without saying, I am worthless. You can say, I am behind, without saying, my life is over. Language shapes attention. Attention shapes interpretation. Interpretation shapes behavior. Behavior shapes identity. And identity shapes destiny. That chain is more powerful than most people realize. Now let me ask you about fear. What would you do if you knew embarrassment could not hurt you? What would you attempt if rejection could not define you? What conversation would you have? What business would you start? What skill would you learn? What room would you walk into? What opportunity would you accept? Fear often does not say never. It says, not yet. It sounds reasonable. Wait until you know more. Wait until you have more money. Wait until you are more confident. Wait until people support you. Wait until the timing is perfect. But perfection is often fear wearing a sophisticated suit. There will almost always be something missing. More knowledge, more money, more confidence, more certainty, more approval. At some point, you have to move with incomplete information. Courage is not certainty. Courage is movement despite uncertainty. And courage grows through use. You do not become courageous and then act. Often you act. And courage grows afterward. Think about the first time you did something difficult. You were afraid. Then you survived. The next time, you were still afraid, but less surprised by the feeling. Then eventually you realized, I can feel fear and still move. That realization changes everything, because now fear loses its authority. It can sit in the passenger seat, but it does not drive. And there is another powerful discipline that people underestimate. Learning to delay emotional reaction. Someone insults you. You want to respond immediately. Pause. Someone rejects you. You want to give up. Pause. You receive bad news, you want to panic. Pause. You are angry. Pause. The ability to pause between stimulus and response is a form of freedom. Because if someone can control your emotions simply by pressing the right button, they have access to you. You don't have to become emotionless. You have to become emotionally responsible. Feel anger. But don't let anger write your message. Feel fear. But don't let fear choose your future. Feel sadness. But don't let sadness define your identity. Feel disappointment. But don't let disappointment become a permanent address. Your emotions are information. They are not always instructions. That distinction can save years of your life. Now, think about your environment. You can have strong intentions and weak surroundings. And weak surroundings will eventually test your intentions. If you are constantly surrounded by people who mock ambition, discipline will feel strange. If your phone is always within reach, distraction becomes automatic. If your room is chaotic, focus becomes harder. If your spending environment constantly encourages consumption, saving becomes difficult. If everyone around you complains, gratitude begins to feel unusual. You do not need to hate anyone, but you must understand influence. Environment quietly trains behavior. Sometimes changing your life requires changing what has access to your mind, not because you are better than others, because you are responsible for what you become. There is a difference between loving people and allowing every influence to shape you. You can care about someone without copying their habits. You can respect someone without following their path. You can forgive someone without giving them control over your future. And sometimes growth requires distance, not anger. Distanced, silence, boundaries, focus. There will be seasons when you cannot explain yourself to everybody. You will have to work quietly. You will have to disappoint people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. You will have to say no. And saying no can feel painful, but every yes has a cost. When you say yes to distraction, you say no to focus. When you say yes to unnecessary spending, you say no to financial freedom. When you say yes to every request, you may say no to your own priorities. When you say yes to comfort every day, you may say no to the stronger future you. Your life is built not only by what you choose, it is built by what you refuse. This is where the idea of the 1% becomes more serious. Being different is not about wearing a different shirt or saying different words. It is about developing standards. Standards for your attention, standards for your work, standards for your behavior, standards for how you speak to yourself, standards for what you tolerate, standards for what you repeatedly consume, standards for what you promise. Because motivation asks, what do I feel like doing? Standards ask, what is required? That is a completely different question. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop asking yourself how you feel. You know the alarm rings. Get up. You know the work matters. Do it. You know the money needs to be saved. Save it. You know the conversation needs to happen. Have it. You know the habit is destroying your focus. Kiss. Remember the trigger. You know the skill will take years. Begin. Not because you feel ready, because you decided. This does not mean becoming harsh with yourself. It means becoming honest with yourself. There will be days when you genuinely need rest. Rest is not weakness. There will be days when you need to slow down. Slowing down is not failure. There will be seasons when survival itself is the achievement. But there is a difference between recovery and avoidance. Learn the difference. Because the mind loves disguises. Avoidance can look like planning. Fear can look like research. Procrastination can look like preparation. Distraction can look like relaxation. Perfectionism can look like high standards. You have to become psychologically honest enough to ask, what am I really doing here? Not what story am I telling? What am I really doing? That question can expose you, and it can free you. Now imagine meeting your future self, not the fantasy version, The honest version. Imagine yourself 10 years from now sitting across from you. That person knows everything you are doing today. Every hour wasted, every promise kept, every promise broken, every opportunity ignored, every time you chose courage, every time you chose comfort. And that future person asks you, what did you do with the years I gave you? What would you say? Would you explain? Would you blame circumstances? Would you talk about how difficult things were? Maybe they were difficult. But what did you do with what you had? That question is not meant to create guilt. It is meant to create awareness, because time is strange. When you are young, a year feels enormous. Then suddenly you look back and realize entire years disappeared. And the tragedy is not simply that time passes. The tragedy is that you can be present while your life passes. You can be physically alive and psychologically asleep. Wake up. Look at your habits. Look at your calendar. Look at your bank account. Look at your body. Look at your relationships. Look at your attention. They are telling you what you actually value, not what you say you value. Your schedule reveals your priorities. Your spending reveals your priorities. Your attention reveals your priorities. Your habits reveal your priorities. And sometimes the life you have is simply an honest reflection of the choices you have repeated. That is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. Because if your choices helped create this reality, new choices can begin creating another, not instantly. But gradually, the same compound effect that built the problem can build the solution. If small distractions created weakness, small acts of focus can create strength. If small excuses created procrastination, small acts of completion can create discipline. If small compromises damage self-respect, small acts of integrity can rebuild it. If repeated fear narrowed your life, repeated courage can expand it. You don't have to repair your entire life tonight. You have to stop making it worse and then begin making it better. One decision, then another, then another. There will be no dramatic music in real life. No audience will stand up when you finally decide to become disciplined. Nobody may know. You will simply wake up tomorrow and face ordinary choices. That is where transformation happens. Not in the speech, not in the notebook, not in the announcement. In the ordinary choice, the alarm, the phone, the meal, the task, the conversation, the purchase, the thought, the response, the decision, again and again and again. This is why mastery of the mind is not some mystical achievement. It is the repeated practice of choosing consciously instead of automatically. Your old life runs on autopilot. Your new life requires awareness. Catch yourself. Notice the impulse. Notice the excuse. Notice the emotional reaction. Notice the story. Then choose. That pause is where transformation lives. Now let's talk about sacrifice, because everyone wants the reward. Few people want the trade. You want freedom. What are you willing to give up? You want wealth. What are you willing to delay? You want mastery. What entertainment are you willing to sacrifice? You want confidence. What uncomfortable situations are you willing to enter? You want peace. What arguments are you willing to stop participating in? You want a stronger body. What comfort are you willing to surrender? Every result has a price. And the price is often paid before the reward becomes visible. That is why people quit. They pay the price, but cannot yet see the result. Imagine planting a tree. You water it. Nothing happens. You water it again. Nothing happens. Weeks pass. Still nothing. A person who only trusts visible results will stop. But beneath the soil, something is happening. Roots are forming. That is how personal growth works. For a long time, your discipline may produce little visible evidence. You study. Nothing changes. You save. Nothing feels different. You exercise. The mirror barely changes. You practice. Nobody notices. You control your emotions. Nobody applauds. But roots are forming. Then eventually, the external world catches up with the internal work. People call it sudden success. They did not see the years underground. Do not confuse invisibility with uselessness. Some of the most important work you will ever do will look insignificant while you are doing it. And that is why patience is part of mastery. You cannot force a compound effect to reveal itself on your preferred schedule. You can only keep contributing. There was a woman who spent years rebuilding her financial life after making serious mistakes. At first, her progress was almost embarrassing. She could only save a small amount. Her friends were buying things she could not afford. She felt behind, but she continued. She learned. She tracked her spending. She stopped using purchases as emotional rewards. She developed skills. She increased her income. She saved more. She invested carefully. Years later, people asked how she became financially secure. They saw the result. They did not see the hundreds of small decisions that created it. And she said something worth remembering. The hardest part wasn't making money. The hardest part was becoming the person who could keep it. That's the deeper level. Your external goal may require an internal identity. You don't simply need more money. You may need more financial discipline. You don't simply need more opportunities. You may need the courage to recognize and act on them. You don't simply need more time. You may need fewer distractions. You don't simply need confidence. You may need evidence. You don't simply need motivation. You may need standards. You don't simply need a better life. You may need to become capable of sustaining a better life. That is why the inner work matters. Because sometimes people receive what they asked for and lose it because they did not become ready to carry it. Success without character can become another form of failure. Money without discipline disappears. Attention without wisdom becomes distraction. Power without self-control becomes destruction. Opportunity without preparation becomes regret. So master yourself before demanding more from life. Because whatever you cannot manage will eventually manage you. If you cannot manage money, money will manage your emotions. If you cannot manage attention, your phone will manage your day. If you cannot manage anger, other people can control you by provoking you. If you cannot manage appetite, temporary pleasure can control your health. If you cannot manage fear, fear can control your opportunities. If you cannot manage time, urgency will control your priorities. Mastery begins with management of self. And self-management begins with awareness. Now let me ask you something difficult. What if nobody is coming? Not to save you, not to organize your life, not to give you discipline, not to rescue your dream, not to force you to become the person you know you can become. What if nobody is coming? That sounds frightening, but it can also be freeing, because if nobody is coming, then you stop waiting. You stop waiting for permission. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop waiting for somebody to believe in you before you believe in yourself. You begin, maybe slowly, maybe imperfectly, but you begin. And when you begin, you discover something. You were never as powerless as you thought. You may not control everything, but you control enough to change the direction. A ship does not need to turn 90 degrees instantly to reach a new destination. Sometimes a small adjustment in direction is enough. Your life works the same way. A small change today can create a completely different destination years from now. This is why the question is not, can I transform my entire life today? The question is, can I make one decision today that my future self will be grateful for? Then tomorrow another, then another. This is how people become different quickly. Now think about regret. Failure hurts, but regret has a different kind of pain. Failure says, I tried and it didn't work. Regret says, I never tried. Failure can teach you. Regret often haunts you with imagination. What if I had started? What if I had stayed? What if I had spoken? What if I had applied? What if I had practiced? What if I had believed? And perhaps the cruelest question is, What if I had simply given myself a chance? Do not build a life where your future self spends years answering that question. You are going to fail at something. You will be rejected. You will make mistakes. Someone will misunderstand you. A plan will collapse. A door will close. You will have bad days. You will doubt yourself. That is part of being alive. But there is a pain that is often worth choosing. The pain of effort, the pain of discipline, the pain of learning, the pain of uncertainty, the pain of starting over, because those pains can produce growth. The pain of regret produces nothing except questions. So, when two pains are available, choose carefully. One pain can build you. The other can haunt you. And now we reach something deeper. You cannot become the 1% while constantly needing everyone to understand you. There will be moments when people think you are wasting your time. There will be moments when your new habits make you look strange. There will be moments when your discipline is mistaken for arrogance. There will be moments when your silence is misunderstood. There will be moments when your boundaries disappoint people. You have to learn to survive misunderstanding. Not every person needs an explanation. Not every criticism deserves a response. Not every opinion deserves access to your nervous system. Sometimes maturity means saying, they don't understand, and that's okay. You know the work you are doing. You know the person you are becoming. You know the sacrifice. You know the reason. Keep going. There is a quiet strength in not needing applause, because applause can become another addiction. If you only work when people notice, you will stop when they stop noticing. But if your reason is internal, you can continue in silence. And some of the greatest transformations happen in silence. You lose weight quietly. You study quietly. You save quietly. You heal quietly. You build quietly. You become disciplined quietly. And then one day the results speak so loudly that explanation becomes unnecessary. This is why you do not need to announce every intention. Protect the process. Let your habits speak. Let your consistency speak. Let your character speak. Now, I want you to imagine something else. Imagine waking up 3 years from now, you have become mentally stronger. Not because life became easy, because you became harder to break. A problem arrives. You don't panic immediately. You breathe. You assess. You act. Someone criticizes you. You listen for what is useful. You discard what is not. A business opportunity fails. You study what happened. You adjust. You lose money. You learn. You experience rejection. You continue. You face fear. You move. You make a mistake. You correct it. This is what mastery looks like. Not a life without problems. A person who no longer needs a problem-free life in order to remain stable, that is strength. And perhaps that is what you are really seeking. Not an easier life, a stronger mind. Because a strong mind can walk through difficult seasons without becoming a different person every time circumstances change. A weak mind is controlled by conditions. A strong mind responds to conditions. That does not mean you never feel pain. It means pain does not automatically become your identity. It means you can cry and continue. You can be afraid and continue. You can be tired and continue wisely. You can fail and continue. You can start over again and again and again. Starting over is not proof that you failed. Sometimes starting over is proof that you refused to remain defeated. There is dignity in beginning again. You don't need to be proud of every chapter. You need to keep writing. And maybe you've wasted years. Maybe you made poor decisions. Maybe you trusted the wrong people. Maybe you ignored opportunities. Maybe you did not take yourself seriously. Maybe you have been your own biggest obstacle. Fine. Tell the truth. Then stop worshiping the past. The past is a teacher, not a landlord. It does not own your future. You can learn from it without living inside it. And perhaps today you are standing at a strange point in your life, not where you want to be, but not where you used to be either. That middle space can feel uncomfortable, You have outgrown old habits, but haven't yet built the new identity completely. You no longer enjoy certain distractions. But discipline still feels difficult. You no longer want the old life. But the new life has not arrived. This is the transition. Do not mistake transition for failure. The old version of you may fight for survival. It may tell you, why are you trying so hard? Just relax. You were happier before. Everybody else is doing it. You can start tomorrow. That voice may become louder precisely because you are changing. Do not panic. The old identity does not disappear because you declared it gone. It disappears because you stop feeding it. Every time you refuse the old pattern, you weaken it. Every time you choose the new behavior, you strengthen the new identity. That is the battle. Not one giant war. Thousands of small votes. And sometimes you will lose a vote. You will procrastinate. You will lose focus. You will react emotionally. You will skip the workout. You will waste an evening. Don't turn one bad decision into an identity. Do not say, I ruined everything. Say, I made a poor choice. Now I choose again. Resilience is not never falling. It is reducing the time between falling and returning. That is a powerful standard. How quickly do you return? How quickly do you correct? How quickly do you stop the spiral? How quickly do you forgive yourself without excusing yourself? That is maturity. Because self-forgiveness without responsibility becomes avoidance. And responsibility without self-forgiveness becomes self-hatred. You need both. I was wrong. And I can do better. I failed. And I can learn. I wasted time. And I can use the next hour. I lost myself. And I can begin finding myself again. This is how the mind becomes strong. Not through constant positivity. Through accurate thinking. You don't need to tell yourself everything is wonderful. You need to tell yourself the truth and still believe that action is possible. That is real optimism, not denial. Possibility. Now think about the word master. Mastery sounds impressive, but mastery is often the ability to do ordinary things under ordinary conditions with extraordinary consistency. It is getting up, doing the work, keeping the promise, managing the emotion, protecting the attention, learning, repeating. There is no secret room where mastery is handed to you. It is built one boring day at a time, one difficult conversation at a time, one temptation resisted at a time, one page, one workout, $1 saved, one skill practiced, one apology, one boundary, one courageous decision. And one day you look back and realize the small things were never small. They were bricks you were building. You simply could not see the building while you were laying the bricks. So build carefully, because your future is being constructed right now, not someday. Now, while you listen, after you stop listening, tomorrow morning, tonight, in the next conversation, in the next decision. Your future self is not waiting somewhere in the distance. Your future self is being created by what you repeatedly do today. And that future self will inherit whatever you leave behind. If you leave chaos, they inherit chaos. If you leave debt, they inherit debt. If you leave poor health, they inherit the consequences. If you leave broken relationships, they inherit loneliness. If you leave discipline, skills, savings, courage, wisdom, and character, they inherit options. Think about that. You are not only living for yourself. In a way, you are preparing the conditions under which your future self will live. So be kind to that person. Don't make their life harder because you refuse to make yours slightly harder today. That is what discipline really is sometimes. You accept a little discomfort now so someone you cannot yet see can experience more freedom later. You study now, they benefit later. You save now, they benefit later. You exercise now, they benefit later. You control your temper now. Your future relationships benefit later. You learn a skill now. Your future opportunities benefit later. You sacrifice now. Your future options expand later. This is why delayed gratification is not punishment. It is a form of love for your future. And once you understand that, discipline stops feeling like a prison. It starts feeling like protection. Protection of your time, protection of your potential, protection of your peace, protection of your future. Now ask yourself, what are you protecting? If you don't know what matters, every distraction looks attractive. But when you know what matters, saying no becomes easier. A person without a purpose is easily entertained. A person with a meaningful purpose becomes selective. Not because they hate fun, because they understand opportunity cost. Every hour has an alternative use. Every dollar has an alternative use. Every conversation has an alternative use. Every ounce of attention has an alternative use. You cannot do everything. So choose. That is adulthood. That is maturity. You choose what deserves your limited life. And the choices become increasingly important as you realize something. You do not have unlimited time. You don't know how many mornings you have. You don't know how many conversations. You don't know how many opportunities. You don't know how many years. That should not make you afraid. It should make you awake. Look at your life. Really look. Is this the life you want to keep repeating? If yes, continue. If no, something has to change. Not tomorrow. Something has to change in the pattern. And maybe that change begins smaller than you expected. Maybe it begins with turning off the phone. Maybe it begins with getting out of bed. Maybe it begins with apologizing. Maybe it begins with opening the book. Maybe it begins with looking at your finances honestly. Maybe it begins with walking away from a destructive habit. Maybe it begins with admitting, I need help. Strength is not pretending you can do everything alone. Strength is knowing what you need and having the courage to seek it. You do not need to be invincible. You need to be responsible. You need to become someone who can face reality without immediately escaping into distraction, because escape is easy. Reality is where growth happens. And the more you practice facing reality, the less frightening it becomes. The bill, the conversation, the unfinished work, the mistake, the weakness, the fear. Fox it, not all at once, but face something every day. Because avoidance grows when fed, and courage grows when practiced. Now consider what happens when you stop chasing motivation. Motivation is useful, but it is unreliable. It comes and goes. Your standards must remain. You cannot build a life that depends on feeling inspired. Some days you will wake up energized. Some days you will wake up empty. The mission cannot change every time your mood changes. This is one of the most important shifts you can make. Stop asking, do I feel motivated? Ask, what did I commit to? That question takes emotion out of the driver's seat. And once you begin operating from commitment, your behavior becomes more stable. You stop starting over every Monday. You stop needing a new video to restart your discipline. You stop needing a new notebook. You stop needing another speech. You start doing. Because knowledge without execution becomes another form of entertainment. You can consume thousands of motivational videos and remain unchanged if you never turn inspiration into behavior. The goal is not to feel powerful while listening. The goal is to become powerful when the video is over and nobody is talking to you. That's the test. When the room becomes quiet, when the screen is dark, when nobody is motivating you, what do you do then? That is where your real philosophy begins. Not what you say, what you do without applause. And maybe that is the definition of the 1%. The willingness to continue after the emotional high disappears. The willingness to choose the long-term reward over the immediate impulse. The willingness to become boringly consistent. The willingness to work while unseen. The willingness to be misunderstood. The willingness to begin before you feel ready. The willingness to fail without surrendering your identity. The willingness to take responsibility. The willingness to master yourself before trying to master circumstances. And there will be moments when you are tempted to compare. Someone is ahead. Someone is richer. Someone is younger. Someone is more talented. Someone started earlier. Someone has better connections. Someone appears to have an easier life. Be careful. Comparison can turn another person's success into your psychological punishment. Study others. Learn from others. Let excellence inspire you. But do not use someone else's chapter to insult your own. Your real competition is the version of you that keeps wasting what you have. You may not control how quickly another person grows. You control whether you grow. And if you improve even slightly each day, your life begins moving. That is enough. You don't need to win today. You need to stop losing the same way. That distinction matters. Maybe you don't need a dramatic breakthrough. Maybe you need to identify the pattern that keeps defeating you. What repeatedly takes you off track? What triggers it? What time does it happen? What emotion comes before it? What environment makes it easier? What story do you tell yourself? Study yourself. Become a student of your own behavior. If you always procrastinate when a task feels uncertain, learn that. If you always spend money when you're stressed, learn that. If you always reach for your phone when you're uncomfortable, learn that. If you always become defensive when criticized, learn that awareness creates options. Once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. That is how you begin mastering the mind. Not by controlling every thought, but by becoming less controlled by unconscious patterns. Thought appears. You notice? Impulse appears. You notice. Emotion appears. You notice. Then you choose. That is freedom. And perhaps the deepest battle you will ever fight is not against the world. It is against the part of yourself that wants the reward without the responsibility, the comfort without the sacrifice, the success without the years, the confidence without the courage, the body without the discipline, the wealth without the learning, the peace without the boundaries, the result without the process. That part of you is human. Don't hate it. Train it. Because your lower impulses are not your enemy. They simply cannot be allowed to become your leader. You are capable of more than your immediate desire. You can want to quit and continue. You can want to spend and save. You can want to react and pause. You can want to hide and step forward. You can want comfort and choose growth. That is power. Not getting everything you want. Choosing what you want more. Write that again in your mind. Choosing what you want more. You want the pleasure of another hour of distraction, but you want freedom more. You want the comfort of avoiding the conversation, but you want a healthy relationship more. You want to spend the money, but you want financial independence more. You want to sleep, but you want the life you are building more. You want to quit, but you want to know what you were capable of more. When your highest value becomes stronger than your lowest impulse, discipline becomes possible. And that is when the battle changes. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are choosing between two futures. One future is created by immediate impulses. The other is created by deliberate decisions. Both are available. Both begin today. Now imagine standing at the intersection between those two futures. One road is familiar. It contains the habits you know, the distractions you know, the excuses you know, the people you know, the comfort you know, the pain you know. The other road is uncertain. You don't know exactly what happens there, but you know who you might become. Stronger, calmer, more capable, more disciplined, more independent, more courageous, more useful, more alive. And perhaps the hardest part is that nobody can walk that road for you. Someone can encourage you. Someone can teach you. Someone can support you. But nobody can make the decision inside your mind. That decision belongs to you. And you will make it repeatedly, not once. Every morning, every temptation, every setback, every opportunity, every difficult moment. You choose. This is why mastering your mind is not a destination. It is a practice. A lifelong practice of returning to what matters. You get distracted, risk turn. You get discouraged, risk turn. You fail, risk turn. You become afraid, risk turn. You lose focus, risk turn. You fall into an old habit, risk turn. The strongest people are not people who never lose their way. They are people who return faster. So if you have fallen, return. If you have wasted time, return. If you have broken promises, return. If you have been afraid, return. If you have lost confidence, return. If you have started and stopped 100 times, return one more time. But this time, don't make a dramatic promise. Make a quiet commitment. Then prove it through action. Because the mind believes evidence. Give it evidence. One day, then another, then another. Let your actions slowly become undeniable. And there may come a morning when you realize that something has changed. The things that once required enormous willpower become normal. Getting up is normal. Working is normal. Learning is normal. Saving is normal. Exercising is normal. Saying no is normal. Protecting your attention is normal. Keeping your word is normal. And what once felt like discipline becomes identity. That is the transformation. You don't spend your entire life fighting the same battle at the same intensity. Eventually, the battle becomes your standard. And your standard becomes your life. That is why you should be careful about what you normalize. Knock-cross keeping promises, knock-cross effort, knock-cross learning, knock-nos healthy boundaries, knock-cross saying no, knock-cross patience. Normalize responsibility. Knock-or-ass starting again. Knock-or-ass courage. Because whatever you normalize, you stop questioning. And whatever you stop questioning can become your identity. So don't normalize your excuses. Don't normalize chaos. Don't normalize debt. Don't normalize disrespect. Don't normalize distraction. Don't normalize being exhausted by a life you refuse to redesign. Don't normalize saying, that's just who I am. You are not finished. You are not a fixed object. You are a developing human being. And development requires participation. Your potential is not your destiny. Potential means possibility. Action turns possibility into reality. You can have talent and waste it. You can have intelligence and waste it. You can have opportunity and waste it. You can have time and waste it. The world is full of people who had potential. What separates potential from achievement is often what happens after the excitement disappears. Consistency. That word may sound ordinary, but consistency has changed more lives than intensity ever will. Intensity says, I'll change everything today. Consistency says, I'll keep going tomorrow. Intensity burns brightly. Consistency keeps the light on. And if you want to become the 1%, learn to respect ordinary consistency, because the world celebrates dramatic results. Life rewards repeated behavior. You don't become fit from one workout. You don't become wealthy from one good decision. You don't become wise from one book. You don't become disciplined from one motivated morning. You don't become confident from one successful conversation. But one can become many, and many can become identity. And identity can become destiny. Now, there is something else I want you to understand about your mind. It will sometimes try to protect you from growth. That sounds strange. But your brain is designed to seek familiarity and conserve energy. New things require effort. Uncertainty requires attention. Discomfort requires adaptation. So when you try to change, the mind may produce resistance. That resistance does not necessarily mean you're on the wrong path. Sometimes it means you're leaving the familiar. You feel uncomfortable. Your mind says, stop. You need to learn to ask, stop because this is dangerous, or stop because this is unfamiliar. Those are not the same. Growth often feels unfamiliar before it feels natural. Speaking confidently feels uncomfortable before it becomes natural. Waking early feels uncomfortable before it becomes natural. Saving money feels restrictive before it becomes freedom. Working deeply feels difficult before focus improves. Saying no feels selfish before boundaries become healthy. Starting a business feels uncertain before experience grows. Do not confuse unfamiliarity with impossibility. Give yourself time to adapt. This is why patience with yourself matters. You're not building a new life in a weekend. You are training a nervous system, a mind, a set of habits, a way of interpreting reality. Be firm, but be patient. Demand better from yourself without becoming your own enemy. Because the goal is not to become someone who hates the old version of themselves. The goal is to become someone who understands that old version, learns from it, and outgrows it. Maybe the old you was doing the best. It knew how to do. Maybe it used distraction to escape pain. Maybe it used procrastination to avoid judgment. Maybe it used comfort because life felt overwhelming. Understand that. Then choose better. Compassion without change becomes stagnation. Change without compassion becomes punishment. You need both. And now I want you to go back to that future image. 5 years. Same life or transformed life. Which one is more frightening? The discomfort of changing or the pain of knowing you could have changed and chose not to? You don't need to answer publicly. Answer privately. Because your answer reveals something. It reveals what matters to you. If the thought of wasting another 5 years scares you, use that fear. Don't run from it. Let it wake you. Let it sharpen your decisions. Let it remind you when the phone is tempting. Let it remind you when procrastination says tomorrow. Let it remind you when fear says stay small. Let it remind you when someone else's opinion makes you hesitate. 5 years will pass anyway. The question is, who will you be when they arrive? Will you have more excuses or more evidence, more fear or more courage, more distractions or more focus, more promises or more proof, more regret or more stories of resilience? The calendar is moving, whether you are ready or not. Time is not waiting for your confidence. It is not waiting for your perfect plan. It is not waiting for your fear to disappear. So, move while imperfect, learn while uncertain, build while afraid, begin while unprepared enough to begin, but prepared enough to take the next step. You do not need the entire staircase. You need the next step, and then the next, and then the next, until one day you look back and realize the staircase was created by your movement. That is how a life changes. Step by step, decision by decision, day by day. But don't underestimate the next decision, because sometimes the next decision is the beginning of a completely different chapter. The decision to stop, the decision to begin, the decision to forgive, the decision to leave, the decision to learn, the decision to save, the decision to speak, the decision to remain silent, the decision to focus, the decision to stop asking for permission, the decision to take yourself seriously. Maybe that is the decision you have been avoiding. Taking yourself seriously, not arrogantly. Seriously, your time matters, your attention matters, your health matters, your character matters, your promises matter, your future matters, your dreams matter. And if you don't treat them as valuable, don't be surprised when other things consume them. Protect what matters. Build what matters. Practice what matters. And when you fail, return to what matters. There will still be difficult days. There will still be uncertainty. There will still be people who disappoint you. There will still be setbacks. There will still be mornings when you don't feel powerful. You don't need to feel powerful. You need to act according to your values. That is deeper than motivation. That is character. Character is what remains when emotion changes. Character is what you do when nobody is watching. Character is what you do when the reward is delayed. Character is what you do when the easy choice is available. Character is what you do when nobody would know if you compromised. And every time you choose integrity in those moments, you strengthen something inside yourself, something money cannot buy, something applause cannot create, something circumstances cannot easily take away. Self-respect And perhaps self-respect is one of the deepest forms of wealth, because when you respect yourself, you become less willing to betray yourself for temporary approval. You become less willing to exchange peace for drama, less willing to exchange health for pleasure, less willing to exchange freedom for impulse, less willing to exchange your future for today's comfort. You begin living from the inside out, and that changes everything. The world may still be noisy, but you become quieter inside. The world may still be uncertain, but you become steadier. The world may still tempt you, but you become selective. The world may still reject you, but you stop rejecting yourself. The world may still say no, but you learn to keep moving. That is strength. Not because nothing hurts, because pain no longer automatically decides your direction. And perhaps there is a moment coming in your life when you will face a choice that looks ordinary to everyone else, but will be enormous to you. Nobody will know its significance. You will. You will stand there with the old option in one hand and the new option in the other. The old option will feel familiar. The new option will feel uncomfortable. And you will hear that familiar voice. Just this once. Tomorrow. You deserve it. It's too hard. What will people think? What if you fail? And somewhere beneath that noise will be another voice, quieter, stronger. The voice of the person you are becoming. It won't scream. It may simply say, not this time. And that may be enough. Not because one decision changes everything instantly, but because one decision proves something. You can choose, then another decision proves it again. And slowly, you become dangerous to your old limitations, not dangerous to people. Dangerous to the excuses that used to control you. Dangerous to the fear that kept you small. Dangerous to the habits that stole your time. Dangerous to the identity that told you this was all you could become. You begin to realize, I am not required to remain who I was. That realization is enormous, because people often treat their past behavior as a prophecy. It is not. Your history explains you. It does not have to imprison you. Your mistakes are chapters. Your habits are patterns. Your fears are responses. Your circumstances are conditions. None of them by themselves are a permanent sentence. You can change direction. You can learn. You can rebuild. You can become unfamiliar to yourself. And perhaps one day you will remember the person listening to this right now. The person who was tired. The person who was uncertain. The person who wondered if change was still possible. And you may realize that the answer was never hidden in some extraordinary secret. It was hidden in the ordinary decisions you were willing to repeat. The morning, the work, the discipline, the pause, the refusal, the lesson, the restart, the uncomfortable conversations, the saved dollar, the finished task, the controlled emotion, the hour of focus, the decision to keep going, and maybe nobody saw. Maybe nobody cared. Maybe nobody applauded. But you knew. You knew. And that knowledge became evidence. Evidence that you could trust yourself. Evidence that you could change. Evidence that you could endure. Evidence that you could build. Evidence that you could become someone different. And once you have enough evidence, something strange happens. You stop needing permission. You stop needing constant motivation. You stop needing everyone to believe because you believe. Not because someone told you that you were special, but because you have watched yourself become stronger. That kind of belief cannot be easily taken away. It was earned, and perhaps that is where real confidence begins. Not in telling yourself that nothing can defeat you, but in knowing that if something does knock you down, you will learn how to stand again. That if the plan fails, you will make another. That if the door closes, you will search for another. That if you lose, you will learn. That if you fall, you will return. That if you become afraid, you will breathe and move. That if you lose yourself, you will begin the search again. You don't need guarantees. You need resilience, because life will not guarantee you success. But you can build the kind of character that keeps responding. And perhaps the strongest person is not the one who has the easiest circumstances. It is the one who has learned that circumstances do not get the final word. There will be seasons when progress is obvious. There will be seasons when progress is invisible. Keep building. There will be seasons when people celebrate you. There will be seasons when people ignore you. Keep building. There will be seasons when you feel powerful. There will be seasons when you question everything. Keep building, because your identity cannot depend entirely on the weather of your emotions. There must be something deeper. A standard, a principle, a commitment, a reason. Something that remains when the excitement disappears. And maybe you have not discovered that reason yet. That's okay. Keep looking. Ask yourself what kind of person you want to be when life becomes difficult. Not when everything goes your way, when it doesn't. Who do you want to be then? That question reveals character, because anyone can be grateful when things are good. Anyone can be confident when they are winning. Anyone can be disciplined when the reward is immediate. But who are you when nothing seems to be working? That is where the deeper training begins. Can you keep your integrity? Can you keep learning? Can you keep moving? Can you keep your mind from turning one setback into an entire identity? Can you continue to believe that your next action still matters? Because it does. Your next action still matters, even after failure, especially after failure. One of the most dangerous thoughts is, I've already messed up, so it doesn't matter anymore. It matters. The next meal matters. The next hour matters. The next conversation matters. The next decision matters. You don't have to erase yesterday. You only have to stop donating tomorrow to it. And perhaps right now, there is something you know you need to stop donating your life to. A habit, a distraction, a relationship pattern, an excuse, a fear, a false identity, a version of yourself that has overstayed its welcome. You don't need to hate it. You need to stop obeying it. And that can begin quietly, no announcement, no dramatic declaration, just a decision. A decision that says, I will not continue doing this simply because I have always done it. That sentence can change a life, because tradition is not always wisdom. Habit is not always truth. Familiarity is not always safety. And comfort is not always peace. Sometimes comfort is simply a beautifully decorated cage. The door is open. You are just accustomed to staying inside. Step out. Not all the way. Just one step, then another. Feel the uncertainty. Feel the fear. Feel the resistance. And keep moving, because somewhere ahead of you is a version of life that cannot be reached by repeating the same choices that created your current one. Something must change. And maybe it is not your entire world. Maybe it is you. Maybe you become the person who responds differently. Maybe you become the person who gets up. Maybe you become the person who finishes. Maybe you become the person who saves. Maybe you become the person who studies. Maybe you become the person who speaks with courage. Maybe you become the person who no longer needs to be chased. Maybe you become the person who can sit alone and still feel whole. Maybe you become the person who can lose without becoming lost. Maybe you become the person who can succeed without becoming arrogant. Maybe you become the person who can receive criticism without collapsing. Maybe you become the person who can receive praise without needing it. Maybe you become the person who does not need the world to constantly remind you of your worth. That is freedom. And once you taste that kind of freedom, something inside you changes. You stop trying to impress everyone. You start trying to honor yourself. You stop asking, do they think I'm successful? You start asking, am I becoming someone I respect? That is a better question, because you can impress people and dislike yourself. You can look successful and feel empty. You can have attention and have no peace. You can have money and have no discipline. You can have followers and have no direction. The real victory is internal alignment. Your actions match your values. Your habits match your goals. Your time reflects what matters. Your behavior reflects who you want to become. That alignment creates peace. Not perfect peace, but the peace of knowing you are no longer constantly betraying yourself. And if you have been betraying yourself for years, rebuilding that relationship will take time. Give it time. Start with small promises. Keep them. Then increase them. Don't create impossible standards that collapse in 3 days. Build a system your future self can sustain, because the goal is not to become disciplined for a week. The goal is to become a disciplined person. The goal is not to save money for 1 month. The goal is to become financially responsible. The goal is not to exercise until you look different. The goal is to become someone who respects the body. The goal is not to work hard for 1 season. The goal is to develop a relationship with meaningful effort. That is identity. And identity is built through repetition. So repeat what you want to become. Practice courage, practice patience, practice focus, practice discipline, practice gratitude, practice learning, practice responsibility, practice silence, practice beginning again. One day, the practice becomes natural, and then your life begins to reflect it. That is the deeper meaning of becoming the 1%. Not becoming perfect, becoming deliberate, not becoming better than everyone, becoming more conscious than you were, not controlling the world, controlling your response, not eliminating every weakness, refusing to let weakness become your ruler, not avoiding pain, learning which pain is worth enduring, not chasing motivation, building standards, not waiting for the future, creating it through today's choices. And maybe the most important thing is this. Do not underestimate the person you can become through 5 years of disciplined attention. 5 years is long enough to transform skills, long enough to transform finances, long enough to transform health, long enough to transform confidence, long enough to transform relationships, long enough to transform character, but 5 years is also long enough to compound neglect. That is why this matters. 5 years are coming either way. The question is not whether time will pass. The question is what it will carry with it. Will it carry excuses or evidence? Will it carry regret or growth? Will it carry the same habits or a new identity? Will you look back and say, I wish I had started? Or will you look back and remember the moment when you finally stopped negotiating with the person you knew you could become? And maybe that moment isn't dramatic. Maybe there is no thunder, no perfect morning, no magical feeling. Maybe it is simply the next decision. The next time you reach for distraction, you pause. The next time fear tells you to stay silent, you speak. The next time you want to quit, you take one more intelligent step. The next time you make a mistake, you correct it instead of attacking yourself. The next time you receive money, you respect it. The next time someone provokes you, you control your response. The next time you feel lost, you return to your values. And perhaps nobody notices. That's okay. You notice. And your mind notices. And slowly, the person inside you begins to understand. We are different now. Not because you said it, because you demonstrated it. Again and again and again. Until one day, the old temptation arrives and finds that the person who used to obey it is no longer there in the same way. The fear arrives. You move anyway. The excuse arrives. You recognize it. The distraction arrives. You protect your attention. The setback arrives. You study it. The rejection arrives. You continue. The criticism arrives. You listen without surrendering your identity. The difficult season arrives. You don't panic, you breathe, you remember, you choose, and maybe that is the moment when you begin to understand what mastery really means. It does not mean the mind becomes silent. It means you are no longer forced to obey every voice inside it. Thoughts can come, feelings can come, fear can come, Doubt can come. But you remain the one who chooses what happens next. And that is a different kind of power. A quiet power. A power that does not need to announce itself. A power that grows in private. A power that appears when life becomes difficult. A power that says, I may not control what happens next, but I will control who I become while it happens. And perhaps tomorrow will test that sentence. Maybe next week will. Maybe next month. Something will happen that you did not plan. Something will challenge your confidence. Something will demand patience. Something will tempt you back toward the old identity. And when that happens, remember the deeper question. Not, how do I avoid this? But, who am I becoming through the way I respond? Because every challenge is asking you something. Every setback asks, will you collapse or learn? Every temptation asks, what matters more? Every failure asks, will you let this define you? Every opportunity asks, are you prepared? Every quiet morning asks, what will you do when nobody is forcing you? And every difficult evening asks, can you keep your standards when your energy is gone? You will not always answer perfectly. You don't need to. You need to keep answering. Keep choosing, keep returning, keep building, because the person you are becoming is not created by one extraordinary day. It is created by thousands of ordinary days when you decided that your future deserved more than your impulse. And there may come a day when you stand somewhere you once dreamed about standing. You will look around, and perhaps the achievement will feel strangely quiet, because you will realize the real victory was not the building, the money, the title, the body, the recognition, or the result. The real victory was the person you had to become to get there. The person who learned to wait, the person who learned to work, the person who learned to say no, the person who learned to begin again, the person who learned that fear could be present without being in control, the person who learned that discipline was not punishment, the person who learned that time was not something to kill, the person who learned that attention was precious, the person who learned that character was built in private, the person who learned that the future was not something to hope for passively. It was something to prepare for deliberately. And maybe standing there, you will remember a much earlier version of yourself. The version that almost quit. The version that almost stayed comfortable. The version that thought it was too late. The version that wondered whether change was possible. And you will understand something that version could not yet see. The distance was never crossed in one giant leap. It was crossed through thousands of small decisions, some confident, some frightened, some painful, some boring, some lonely, some invisible. But decisions nonetheless. And the next one is still waiting. Not the final decision, not some grand conclusion, just the next one, the one that will tell your mind a little more about who you are becoming. The one that may seem insignificant today. The one nobody else may ever know about. The one that happens in the quiet space between impulse and choice. The one where you pause. Look at the old road. Look at the new road and realize that you don't need to know everything about the future to take the next step. You only need to know which direction deserves your life. And then, when the old voice speaks again, when comfort asks for another compromise, when fear asks for another delay, when distraction offers another escape, when doubt tells you that you are not ready, when the past tries to convince you that you are still the same person, there is a deeper part of you that has been getting stronger through every disciplined choice, every failure survived, every promise kept, every morning you got back up, every time you chose your future over your impulse. And that part of you does not need to shout anymore. It simply knows. It knows that the life you want will require something from you. It knows that the future will not be built by wishing. It knows that comfort has a price. It knows that discipline has a price. It knows that regret has a price. It knows that courage has a price. and it knows that you are going to pay one of those prices anyway. So choose carefully. Choose the price that builds you. Choose the discomfort that expands you. Choose the discipline that frees you. Choose the courage that introduces you to the person you have been postponing. Choose the hours that create something. Choose the silence that protects something. Choose the habits that strengthen something. Choose the decisions your future self will understand. Because somewhere ahead, that future version of you is waiting, not as a fantasy, not as a perfect person, not as someone who never struggles, but as someone who learned to stop surrendering the direction of life to every temporary feeling. And perhaps you are closer to that person than you think. Perhaps the distance is not measured in years. Perhaps it is measured in decisions. One decision, then another, then another. Until one day, the life around you begins to look different because the person inside you has become different. And the next time you look into the mirror, you may not see perfection. You may see scars. You may see mistakes. You may see years that cannot be recovered. But you may also see something else, a person who stayed, a person who learned, a person who kept going, a person who finally understood that the mind is not a prison unless you surrender the keys. And the keys have always been in the moments when you choose. Even when nobody is watching, especially when nobody is watching